guessing that the place and the name Argyll in Scotland has got to be Argilla. So Argyll would be, they were givers of hostages to somebody else, and presumably Northern Ireland, because the Irish colonised Scotland, and Argyll was the nearest right across the way there. So,
At least they took their socks.
huh?
At least they gave them their socks.
Socks? Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry, missed that. Well, they had a lot of sheep up there, so woolen socks were very much. So language is very illuminating. Now, if you look at the two islands, you look at England and Ireland, Britain, and there's a point at which they almost touch between Argyll and between Scotland. I mean, you can see the islands, you can see the hills from Northern Ireland. So why would anybody risk going across when they can go across that short distance? So all of the early raids and armies and whatever would have migrated through Scotland. And all of the stories that we have of Niall of the Nine Hostages are all coming down through Scotland, going into Scotland, subjecting the Scots and subjecting the Picts to where they're not a bother. They let them get on with whatever and intermarry, and So there's no doubt that the Uli, the people from Ulster, Ula, prior to Niall, would have conquered and consolidated all of Scotland, except maybe the real wilds up in the north, which may still be more associated with Scandinavia over the sea, but certainly what we consider Scotland. Now, also, during the Roman times and the Hadrian's Wall was, without any doubt, to keep the Scots, and that's what they called it, the Scots out. And the Scots were the Irish, Scotia, because on the maps, the Romans always referred to the Irish as Scotia and the Scots. So when they looked north across Hadrian's Wall, they didn't distinguish between the Scots. They were all that same crowd that came Scotland and down and into Ireland. So therefore, the Romans, in many ways, built the Hadrian's Wall to keep the Irish out, because they knew that if they went any further than that they would be vulnerable to the Irish coming across at the straits at Antrim to Argyll. Now,
is there a distinction between these people that you're talking about and the Picts, P-I-C-T-S?
Well, the Picts were, as far back as anybody can go, were subordinate to the Scots, the Irish. The Irish subjugated the Picts at a very early time. When I say at a very early time, well back into prehistory. So the Picts would have been there, but they would be the Aboriginals.
Okay.
And probably actually were, even prior to that, the Aborigine Irish as well, because they were painted themselves blue. They did all their and we have a tradition in the very, very early Irish that they also used tattoos and painted themselves blue, and that's why to this day a black man or a non-white person is called Fear Gurm. Remember we talked about that before? In other words, it's a blue man. The actual word, the Irish word for a black person or a non-white person is Fear Gurm. So that the name, the blueness of the tattoo and the Picts has retained. So it's likely that the the Irish, as they became the Irish from successive invasions from the Mediterranean or from Europe, drove the Aboriginals out of Ireland and back up into the northern Scotland, and so the Picts. So the Picts would have been a pre-Celtic, pre-Aboriginal, an Aboriginal race of people, but certainly were no, they were not a military threat. They were subordinate to the both the Irish and the inhabitants of the island of Britain, who got mostly wiped out by the Romans. They were pushed into the west, into Wales, and most of them migrated across from Wales and Cornwall into what the Romans called Armorica, which is Brittany. So actually, there are probably more. That's why it's called Brittany. There are probably more pre-Roman Britons in Brittany and France than there are on the island of Britain. So it is a bit of a mix-up. But anyway, to stick with Niall and his period, so therefore the Irish kings would have gotten to know pretty quickly that the Hadrian's Wall wasn't much of a problem anymore. So that would have been the first breach, the first wall that they would get through, and the Romans abandoned it. So then the pickings would have been real good, because York was a real prize. I mean, York was the capital of the Roman Empire at one time. That's where Constantine was crowned Emperor of Rome, in York. He was the general on the island of England and Britain, and he was. They chose him by acclamation. His army. He was a great general, but they chose him, and he was actually crowned. And that partly had to do with the withdrawal back to Rome. They sort of said, we got to straighten it. We're not getting the support. Rome is weak, and also had been attacked and actually sacked by a Celt from Lombardy, from northern Italy. York was actually superior to London during the Roman period. London was important, but it wasn't as important as York or Bath and Bristol. They were actually more powerful fortresses, particularly York. Absolutely York. York is an extraordinary place. And they still haven't excavated a tiny fraction of it. There's like hundreds of feet of old York down there. They've only just barely, all of modern York is sitting on top of some of the most valuable Roman and pre-Roman unexcavated archaeological remains maybe in the world. Anyway, so Niall succeeded his father as a raider, which is kind of interesting, in that his mother was the result of a raid by his father. But that's what I was getting to when I actually got onto the Gilla stuff. So it's likely that she wasn't just a sheep herder or some little peasant girl running around in the fields that he put over his shoulder and brought back. She was, well, we know she was, because that was actually well documented, that she was the daughter of a king. So that would be typically what a powerful king, raider, whatever would do. He would say, okay, you don't have a chance. We need to talk. So he would get the king to submit, and I won't burn your city, or as long as you just do what I tell you and you pay tribute to us and so on. And say, well, yeah, okay, we'll, but just to keep you honest, we'll take your daughter. She seems like she's a pretty nice looking lady anyway, so I may even keep her for myself. So so she would have been so it was more to keep the English king from coming up the road after him when he was gone. You-
How is the hostage?
I would think so, more of a prize than a hostage. So therefore, she would be honoured, as happened with sons, eldest sons that were taken as hostages of kings. They became very attached to the king that took them as a hostage, and often even became the king themselves. So the business of being taken a hostage wasn't as bad as we think it
This
is.
Niall's mother?
Yes.
Is that right? So this would be the 300s? right?
Yes.
So which king? The Romans were ruling.
Mugmadon, yeah.
So no, I'm just
Hmm?
thinking who was her dad?
Oh, we don't know.
Yeah, but I was thinking, what's the basis of her being essentially a princess? Because it was the Romans ruling Britain at this time, except for the